All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. So we're really excited for today's event. We are running a whole series of events this week during the Path Week in partnership with the Gore, Downey, and Chaney Wenjack Fund. So the Downey Wenjack Fund is part of musician Gore Downey's legacy and embodies his commitment and that of both the Downey and Wenjack families to call Canadians to action in solidarity with Indigenous peoples of this land. So the goal is to continue the conversation that began with Chaney Wenjack's residential school story and to support the reconciliation process through awareness, education, and action. So we're really excited this week. Canadians classrooms from all over will be helping us celebrate Indigenous scientists, artists, and leaders as we work towards meaningful reconciliation. So this month on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants as well, we're also celebrating space exploration. So talking to scientists and explorers from around the world who study how we can leave our planet and explore beyond our atmosphere. So in that way, we're really lucky to have Aaron Yazzie joining us today. He's a mechanical engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He designs, builds, and tests robotic systems to acquire samples of rocks and soil from other planets so that we can study them for science. So he's had roles on the Mars Science Laboratory rover mission and the InSight Mars lander. Aaron is Navajo, originally from a small town near the border of the Navajo Nation. He's passionate about spreading the excitement of STEM to students from his home community as well as across the nation. So Aaron, it's so great to have you joining us live today. We're excited to learn a little bit more about what you do. And then we've got a great group of classrooms who are excited to ask some questions.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Like, wave if you can hear what I'm saying. Excellent. Good to see you guys. Good morning. Well, it's morning here for me. I'm in the Los Angeles area, so it's about 8 o'clock in the morning. But first, let me go ahead and introduce myself to all of you guys. Yad Aaron Yazzie Inishia, Ashihen Nishlin, Turatitni Bashichin, Kia Ani Edishache, Tohane Edashanella, Kutago Haspin Nishlin. Aro Isakinde Nasha, Shamato Shje, Shirley do Kiazi, well, yeah. Aro NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Denanish, do Pasadena, California, Edishagan. Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Aaron Yazzie. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me, inviting me into your classrooms today. The introduction that I just shared with you guys is how we as Navajo people introduce ourselves because we have a clan system. And so I told you my first clan, which is Salt Clan. That's what I got from my mother. And then I told you my second clan, which is Bitter Water Clan. That's what I got from my dad, and he got that from his mother. And then my grandfather on my mother's side's clan is Towering House, and my grandfather on my father's side is Nearwater Clan. And I'm originally from Holbrook, Arizona. That's where my parents still live. And I currently now live in Pasadena, California, where I've been living for about 10 years as a mechanical engineer for NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. So I get to design parts and mechanisms and assemblies that will go into space and study our solar system. NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory is known for sending robotic space exploration into space to study the deep space, other planets, asteroids, moons, and the one that we're kind of most known for is for sending things to Mars. And so if you've ever heard about a rover in any of your science classes or in the news, most likely it has come from NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And so I am really excited about the theme of this gathering today because it is near and dear to my heart, being a Native American person. Down here in the U.S., we also have a similar history to the residential schools that you guys had in Canada for the First Nations people. We also had a lot of a boarding school system that happened around the same time here in the U.S. And so I understand the results and the trauma that can come out of something like that. And it sort of has become a big part of my life because I know people and relatives that have gone through that. And I always try to acknowledge and see what they went through in sharing about how I got to where I am today. And so that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. I'm going to jump over to try to share my screen with you guys. And let me see if I can do that. Share. Okay. can you guys see the screen? Just wave your hands if you can see this cool picture of a Mars rover. Let me go ahead and make that bigger. Okay, so this is the Curiosity Rover, and I like to tell people, because I worked on so many Mars missions, that my job is basically to play in the dirt every day, which is basically true. And I'll tell you exactly why in a little bit.
Aaron, can I just interrupt you for just a moment? Can you,
sure thing.
I think it's the button display settings. Right now we see the presenter view, but I think if you hit the display settings, it'll switch it to it can switch it to the other view for us.
Okay.
Yeah, swap view. There we go. Beautiful.
That's better?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a picture of the United States and a little bit, a map showing exactly where I'm from. So that darker reddish blob is the Navajo Nation. You can see it's pretty big. It's about the size of one of our states on the East Coast. And my hometown is right on the bottom border of that. And I currently live over in California, so not too far from home. Here's a picture side by side of Mars and where I'm from, back in Arizona. So I'm standing on a cliff and a mesa pretty close to where my grandparents' house was. I like to show this picture to show you guys that Mars and Earth are really not that different. And it really drives it home for me because they look exactly the same. The same desert hills and the mesas and the rock formations and the canyons and all of that kind of stuff that we see here on Earth. We have those on Mars because they were created in the same way. And so when we study a place like Mars, we're actually learning a lot about Earth, and we're learning about our origin, where the Earth came from and how it developed and came to be. And so that's really good tie into the theme of what I wanted to talk about, you guys, is sort of how we learn from our past to inform the present and how we use that knowledge to determine the future. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we at NASA adopt this way of thinking, and also how me and my personal life have found this useful. So first, the past. Here's a snapshot of some past Mars missions that we've sent already to Mars. So you can see that the smallest little rover, the first one that we sent, was sent back in 1997. Following that, it was the first time we learned that we could drive wheels on a robotic rover on the surface of Mars, and so we sent a bigger rover. We actually sent two rovers that were the same, Spirit and Opportunity. We call them the twin rovers because they're the exact same rover type, and they landed in 2004, and they operated for a good 12 years or so. After that, we sent the Curiosity Rover, which is the big guy right in the back, and we sent that back in 2012, and that's still currently up there driving around, still drilling rocks and learning science for us. And we're about to send another one called Mars 2020, and it looks a lot like Curiosity. And then what's not pictured here is a whole bunch of missions that we've sent, landers and orbiters and imagers and all that type of stuff that helped us learn about Mars and take all these baby steps so that we can learn from each mission, piggyback off of it, and further and further our science knowledge. So here's a video I have. So that's the Curiosity Rover. This is the one that's currently on Mars right now. And this is one of the first projects that I got to get involved in when I first started working here. When I first walked into JPL and took my first tour, I saw this rover being built in the clean room, which was so exciting. And then I pretty soon after that got involved in testing out its capabilities to grab samples from the Martian surface. And so that's basically all the movements, the small motor timing and motions that we would send, making sure that we did everything in the right sequence, and we would actually come up with an entire sequence that would then allow us to get the perfect sample. And we did a lot of that kind of testing here in the Mars yard here at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It's a lot of land that we made to look like Mars, and we put rocks out there and we put hills out there, and we can practice driving up and down these hills and driving over rocks and drilling into rocks. We also, here's a picture of me working with it late night one night, and you can see how tall it is. I think it's about 7 feet tall, so it's much taller than I am. It's a big rover, and so the end of the arm has what we call a turret, and the turret has a bunch of instruments on it, and so you can see a picture of the turret that's on the rover on Mars right now. We made a replica of that. It's made the exact same way, and we have it here on Earth. And so we use that replica to do our tests in a giant thermal chamber. And so this giant chamber is about the size of a walk-in closet. And what we would do is we would pump it down to a really cold temperature, and we would backfill it with carbon dioxide, and we would put rocks and sand in there, and we would practice drilling. And this is how we figured out how to teach the rover how to drill. And so here's one of our first scoop tests. Here's a picture through the chamber window to show that we had got the perfect scoop. And so we sent these commands up to the rover, and lo and behold, it did its first scoop successfully. So that was really exciting for our team. We also did the same thing for drilling. We would pick out parameters and we would practice drilling, and then we sent those commands up to the rover. And this is the first time that it deployed and was about to drill on Mars, and there's its first drill into Mars. So that was another really fun thing for me to get involved in. And so that rover is still driving around today, taking drill samples. I think this one was taken earlier this month. You can see right in front of it, that little gray spot with a little hole, that's where it drilled into the ground. And so I'm using the Curiosity Rover as an example of how something from our past is actually about to inform the way, the reasons why we do things today. And so I'm going to start talking about the present. Here's another video. So this is Mars 2020, the project that I currently work on. So that's March 2020. It's so exciting because all of that's happening right now. I actually have been working on this project for the past 4 years or so, and I'm in charge of the rover's drill bits. And so I actually just finished building my parts for this rover earlier this year, around July, August time. I finished my drill bits, installed them into this rover, and all the images and the videos that you just saw was the fully assembled flight rover going through its testing and assembly and checkouts. And so all that's happening right now. It's a really exciting time to be here. So you can see from this conceptual model that this rover is almost exactly the same as the Mars Science Laboratory rover. So you can see that we took something from the past and we updated it and we learned from it, and we're using it to inform our present project. But there are a few new things on this rover. We're actually sending a new set of instruments on the turret, and one of them is this giant corer. So before we sent a drill that could drill into rocks and create powder, and we would study the powder. This time we're trying to drill into rocks and take a solid core of rock, one that hasn't turned into powder yet, so that we can save that core in a safe place on Mars and then send future missions to grab those cores and bring them back to Earth. And it'll be the first time that we ever bring anything back from Mars to Earth ever in history. And we can study it way better than we've ever been able to. And we'll learn a lot about returning things from Mars. So let me zoom in on the subsystem that I worked on. So like I said, the end of the arm is the turret, and the turret kind of looks like this down there. It has the ability to drill, and we actually have 3 different types of drill bits that we're sending with this rover. The one that you can see installed in there right now is what's called an abrading bit. The abrading bit can make a shallow hole about 2 inches in diameter, and that allows us to create a nice flat surface for us to take a bunch of images with a bunch of other instruments. But we also have a coring bit, which grabs a rock core, and we have a regolith bit, which allows us to get loose soil. And so I was in charge for creating all of these bits. I like to show this because it just shows you that some of the things that you guys might do in coming up with an idea or inventing something, starting with a class project or something, is the same way. Those types of skills are the same things that I use now. Like I start with paper and I do brainstorming and I make a mind map and I sketch my ideas out. As an engineer, I then take those ideas and I put them into a 3D model in the computer. And so that the second image there you see is a 3D model that I can turn around and manipulate, and I can make the part exactly like I want it to look like in real life. And then I take that model and I make engineering drawings. And so that's the third image you see, is an engineering drawing with a lot of very finite details about exactly how we want to build the part. And then finally, we send those drawings out to the machine shop, and then we get them built, and then we get them coded, and then we bring them into a clean room and we assemble it. And so that's the picture you see on the right. And all throughout the entire process, you can see in the background is a lot of analysis and a lot of thinking and a lot of planning. And so here's a picture of just the life of a bit. So we have one of the bits being machined in the top left. There's a lot of very intricate machining processes that happen. In the top right is where we install the teeth into each bit. So they get brazed in there. And so there's a process where we braze teeth in. The bottom left is where we're testing bits. So we actually put them in this thermal chamber and we send them to really high and really cold temperatures similar to what they would feel on Mars. And we would spin them to see how they performed and make sure that the fit was right. And then here's a picture of the final assemblies of our flight bits. And then there's the team that I worked with to build all of these. You can see that we're dressed head to toe in crazy, funny looking bunny suits, because if we're going to build hardware that's going to go to Mars, and if we're going to try to bring that sample back to Earth, we have to be very careful about how clean we make it. And we don't want to contaminate Mars, and we don't want to contaminate Earth. And so we were very, very cautious when we built these drill bits. We actually weren't allowed to use any hair products. We weren't allowed to use anything that had smell to it. Like if you had shampoo that smelled like fruit, you can't use that. You have to use shampoo that's neutral smelling. The same goes for deodorant. We had to go into a clean room wearing a full bunny suit, and then in that clean room we had to put on another layer of sterile smock and goggles and gloves just to go into this extra clean room to build our hardware. And so then we're now in the phase now, like I said, I delivered my parts into the rover, and that's off being tested with the rover. I made a separate set of hardware so that we can start drilling right away, because we're going to learn a lot of stuff if we just start using our parts. And so we have this set up in one of our dirty labs to start drilling into rocks and learning about how it performs with the flight drill and the flight bits. And so hope that's going to be launching next year. It'll look like this. Hopefully, it'll be taking a lot more selfies. You should definitely follow along in the news. It'll be a really exciting mission. And that brings us to the future, Mars sample return. So like I said, this is the first mission in the series of 3 missions that we hope to bring samples of Mars rock back to Earth. And so here's just a schematic of what we hope. The red part of it you can see is where we're sending the rover, Mars 2020. We're going to grab samples and cache it. The blue area is another mission where we would send something there to fetch those samples and put it into some kind of launch vehicle, and so that's something that can launch from Mars into orbit around Mars. The third mission, which is the light blue at the top, is some kind of orbiter we're going to send to orbit around Mars and wait for those samples. Once we send those samples into space and they're orbiting around Mars, the third mission can capture that in flight somewhere in space and then fly those back to Earth and land it for us so that we can start studying it. And the reason why I like to bring that up is because that's the future. There's the evolution of a Martian. We've sent all these rovers and we learn and we learn and we learn from it. And then eventually we're going to have humans that get to go to Mars. Mars 2020, like I said, is the first time we're going to send something back. And that's the first baby step that we need to learn stuff about in order to be able to send humans there. It's also a very heavy rover. And so we're learning heavy, heavy things there. And so this is important because this kind of stuff is going to happen when you guys get older. Like by the time you guys go to college and you start studying engineering and then you get a job at NASA or someplace like that, you could be a person that's working on a mission to Mars, which is really exciting. So we definitely need you. We need astronauts that are willing to go to Mars, and that could be you when you're ready, when you get through college and you become an engineer or a scientist. That could be you that goes to Mars and grabs samples for us. Okay, and so this is the last part of my presentation. I just wanted to bring it home and make it a little bit personal. To say that this is the same thing that we natives are also practicing. It's very important for us. It's very important for me to acknowledge my past, to help it inform my present so that I know where I'm going into the future. And so here's a picture of my grandparents. You can see that they grew up very traditional. They only spoke Navajo. All the way until the day that they died, they only spoke Navajo language. They never spoke English. My parents grew up like that. Their first language was Navajo. They learned English when they went to school for the first time. The bottom right picture is actually a picture of my older brother standing on the ground and then my father holding me on his shoulders. And that's up near my grandparents' piece of land on the Navajo reservation. And so I understand that it's a kind of a crazy thought for someone like me to have grandparents who grew up in such a traditional way of life, no English, and they didn't go to school. They lived off the land. Then all of a sudden, 2 generations later, we have somebody. I have the ability to work on something like Mars 2020, which is such a blessing, and I definitely want to acknowledge what we overcame in order to get here. Here's a picture of my parents with me on my graduation day from Stanford. Even that leap was something that wasn't expected. I didn't know growing up that I was going to be able to go to a place like Stanford University and get a degree. But I knew that my parents made that big journey from being born at home and from learning English as a second language, and then they both went to college, and then I was able to take that opportunity to take it even further. And so then that brings me to my present, which is my ability to work on Mars 2020 and Mars missions. And I now like to put these images up to always remind myself where I am now and where I'm from, and how, like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, when we understand where we came from, we understand where we are, who we are, and we understand where we're going. So here's a good example of how how Earth and Mars are very similar, and that if we know about how Mars developed, how a terrestrial planet came to be, we also learn about ourselves. The picture on the left is a picture of Canyon de Chelly back on the Navajo Nation. It's a big canyon that used to be a bunch of sand dunes, and over time, wind and water carved out this beautiful canyon. And you can see those same types of features on Mars, where water and wind has carved out this desert, and then the way in the background you see hills, and also on the other side of the background you see mesas. The same types of stuff that form that land, those landmarks are the same ones that we have here. So we learn about where we came from to understand who we are. This is the home, a traditional type of Navajo home. This is the one that my mother was born in, actually, and she lived in it when she was a young child. And then you can see, I just like to put it next to the rover because look at those deserts. They look exactly the same. Here's a picture of my grandma scooping the ground. She's actually trying to we make a certain type of corn loaf bread in the ground, and so she's actually digging the pit to help put the bread into the ground oven. And then here's a picture of my contribution of scooping. It's sort of similar. I just like to see these two images next to each other. And then here's a good one to remind us that maybe one day this is what the future will look like. We'll have people standing on the ground on Mars observing the view. I like to show these side by side to show how red some of Earth's deserts can be and how red Mars also is. It's just a really cool thing, and it always reminds me, and I hope it reminds you guys, to always look to the past, understand where you came from, understand what got you there. Maybe it's your parents, maybe it's your teachers, and help it inform what you're doing now, and learn from that so that you can take that into the future and become what you're going to be in the future. So that's the end of my slides. So let me try to make sure I can stop sharing, and then we can start switching over to some questions.
All right. Awesome, Aaron. We got you back on the main screen. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. I mean, it must be absolutely incredible to know something that you've built and designed is going to be on Mars and doing some really exciting science, some exciting research. And then thank you for sharing the personal bit at the end. You know, that picture of you with your parents, they just look so proud. It must have been quite an amazing moment. So thank you for sharing some of those personal moments with us too.
Yes, of course.
All right, awesome. Well, let's meet some of our live classrooms because I think it's time that we grab some questions as well. I can see there's lots of classrooms tuning on YouTube. Don't forget to introduce yourselves and send us in some questions. In fact, I'll give a shout out to a few classrooms now. Grade 6, 7's hanging out in Clinton, Ontario. We got some second graders and Mr. Chris's class in Canton or in Michigan. And then looks like some grade 11's hanging out with us as well. So we have lots of students hanging out online with us too. But let's meet a camera classroom. Let's start off in Mrs. Johnson's class. Grade 6 is hanging out with us in Spruce Grove, Alberta. So let me turn their microphone on. There it is. How are we doing, Spruce Grove?
Yes. Yes. So, hello, Mr. Yazzie. My name is Mike, and I am wondering, once Mars 2020 is on Mars, what will happen with Curiosity Rover?
Good question. So the question that he asked was, once we send this new Mars 2020 rover up to Mars, what's going to happen to the Curiosity rover that's already there? The answer is we're just going to keep using it. We like to get the most life out of these robots as we can, and so just like the ones before it, the twin rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, those were only supposed to last on Mars for 6 months. That's how long they were designed for, and they end up lasting for 12 years. And so same thing with Curiosity. We designed it to work for 2 Earth years, which is 1 Martian year, and it's been going for the past, 6, 7 years. So we hope that even after we send Mars 2020 there, that both of those rovers are going to continue to operate for a long, long time.
All right, very cool. That's awesome to hear about that longevity. It means you guys are doing something right down there when you're engineering those rovers and sending them to Mars.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Nelson, British Columbia. I think we have some grade 7s hanging out with Mrs. O.C. Lloyd. Let me get their microphone turned on. Where did it go? There it is. How are we doing, grade 7s?
Good. Good morning.
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 How do you control the rover?
Control the rover. Okay, so yeah, he asked about how we control the rover. and that's also a good question. I actually worked a little bit in the way that we communicate with Curiosity, and it'll be very similar for the way that we communicate with Mars 2020. So actually we have a series of large like antenna discs on Earth that are able to communicate with all of our spacecraft all throughout the solar system. So we call it the Deep Space Network. And so what we have is 3 giant stations set around the entire globe. So we have a set in Canberra, Australia. We have a set in Madrid, Spain, and we have another set in California. And so so now you can imagine whenever Earth is rotating around, we have a station that can point in any direction that Earth is rotated, and those communicate with all of our spacecraft at all times. And so we have so many out there, even ones sent by the European Space Agency or Japan, or Canada. If there's any missions that get sent into space, they usually use the Deep Space Network, and their communication comes through JPL. And so they're each scheduled a specific amount of time to communicate. And so they'll send big data packages is what they do. And so since we can only communicate with the rovers during a small window each day, we actually will have what we call rover planners. Rover planners, their job is to come up with the entire day of a rover. They'll say, all right, today I want the rover to drive over that hill, and I want it to take a bunch of pictures, and then I want it to undeploy its arm and set it down on the ground. And so then they'll come up with all the sequences that they need to for that. They'll send it up in one data package in the morning, and the rover will go off and just do that automatically by itself. And then at the end of the day, it'll send all the information back and say, here's what I did today. And then we check to make sure that it did all the things we asked it to do. And sometimes it didn't, but it's still safe. It'll actually has a lot of protection, self-protection. So if it runs into an issue or something, it'll put itself into a safe mode, and then we know, oh, okay, it stopped at this sequence, and we can pick up from there again when we plan for the next day. And so that's how we communicate with the rover. What it means is that we have kind of a delayed communication. We won't really find out how the rover did until the next day. And so it's fun. A little fun fact is that when I was working on that part of the mission, early in the mission, we really wanted to get the communication down right away. And so we were working on Mars time. And so Mars, just because of the way that they rotate and they orbit, their day is about 40 minutes longer than an Earth day. So it's almost the same, but not quite. And so you can imagine that after a little while, it gets shifted so much that all of a sudden 8 o'clock on Mars is 2 o'clock in the morning our time. And so us engineers would have to come in at 2 o'clock in the morning and wake up when the rover wakes up and plan our shift that way. So that was fun. We did that for about the first 3 months.
All right. Not a lot of people can say that they live their life around Mars time, so that's pretty cool. Okay, let's grab another question. Let's go to Arn Pryor, Ontario. Mrs. Rose class is hanging out with us. Let me get their microphone turned on. There it is. How we doing, boys and girls?
Good. Come on up there.
Oops, I think I might have accidentally. Let me turn that back on for them. There we go.
So do you have any rovers that have AI, or are they all remotely controlled?
Ooh, that's a good question. So mostly the rovers don't have artificial intelligence. That's what AI stands for everybody that doesn't know. But the Curiosity Rover actually does have AI capability. They started to implement this new artificial intelligence into the rover for when it's trying to drive long distances. So it actually had the ability to take a bunch of pictures around it, and it would be able to detect large objects in front of it. And so if it saw a giant boulder in front of it or a big cliff on this side, it would actually have the intelligence to know to avoid those things, and it could plan its own route to go around them. And so that was kind of the very first early types of that type of technology for Curiosity, and they still use it now, and they'll probably use it a lot more for Mars 2020.
All right, very cool question. Let's see. Let's go to Sherwood Park. Some grade 6s hanging out with Mr. Jorgensen. I think that's Sherwood Park, Alberta, but they'll correct me if I'm wrong. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, grade 6s?
Good.
Nice big group of grade sixes.
How long will it take until the samples come back to Earth?
Ooh, good question. So let's see. That's a good, complicated question. One, I think NASA and people who are involved in the mission are trying to wait to see how successful we are in grabbing the samples before they start planning the sample return part of it. So the sample return part of it is in the very early stages. So it's hard to tell exactly when they're going to say, now we're going to send that mission and then we expect it by a certain time. But once they decide when they want to do it, it'll probably be in the next, I'd say like 6 to 10 years is the time frame for when we're going to start sending those missions and start planning those return samples. Just to give you an idea of how long it usually takes for things to fly back and forth between Earth and Mars, Earth goes around the sun in a certain orbit. Mars also goes around the sun in a much bigger orbit. So like I said, Earth's year Mars's year is about twice Earth's year. And that's because it takes this oblong shape around the sun. But there is a point where they get really close to each other. And that's when we try to launch between the two of them. And so every 2 years, we have this window where we are pretty close to Mars and we try to launch in that window. And something the size and the weight of a big rover will take about 9 months to fly to Mars.
All right, so ways in the future, but it's not an easy thing to be able to pick up samples on another planet and then have them sent back home. So that's pretty darn cool that a mission like that is in the works, being planned for, and it sounds like February when 2020 rover gets there that the first steps are happening.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Smith's class, Oakville, Ontario, grade 5s. Let me get your microphone turned on. Yeah. There, how are we doing, Oakville?
Well, my question is, after the March 2020 bot, is there going to be, like, what's the estimated date of the next one?
Okay. So likely the next one after that will be what they call the Fetch Rover. And it's literally going to go up there and fetch our samples. And we're actually, it's not all coming out of NASA. We're actually working with a bunch of different countries, like ESA, the European Space Agency, is doing a lot of that work, actually. And so I imagine after we successfully send the Mars 2020 rover next year, they will start to plan the next rover, and it'll be maybe another 4 or 5 years before that one starts to launch. But that's just an estimate.
You know, Aaron, I think that's a really cool thing about space exploration is oftentimes some of the countries most involved in it, leadership might not be getting along so well at different times, but it seems like the space agencies are always able to work together and get things done. I think that's a really cool kind of that goal of humanity working together to accomplish things. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Where do we have to go next? Ottawa, Ontario. Grade 6 is hanging out with Mrs. Porcari. Let me get their microphone turned on. There it is. How are we doing, Ottawa?
Good.
Are there any female Indigenous workers in NASA?
Good question. Yes, the answer is yes. I actually, when I started working here, I met an Indigenous female NASA worker. And so she's the one that actually really got me excited about JPL. She took my resume back, and that's where I got offered an interview. So she's the one that kind of pulled me in, and she was my mentor the first, actually she's still my mentor because she's been here for longer. And so the job that she did is she was a space navigations engineer. And so that means that when we send something up into space and we want it to try to get to Mars, we want it to get to Jupiter, we have to plan this trajectory path that involves doing gravity assistance around other moons and around other planets. And they can figure out exactly how to plan that trajectory for those types of missions. So she was really smart and she was amazing. But there's also others that I've met all over the place. There's actually a poster that was recently made about all the Indigenous people that work at NASA. And I would say maybe about half of them are female.
All right, very, very cool. So Aaron, I want to grab a question from online. So this is a two-parter from two different groups. They're wondering what, if you could add any instrument or tool to the rover, what would it be? And what would your advice be for students who want to maybe follow in your footsteps and try for a career somewhere like NASA?
Okay, those are great questions. Man, what would I want to send? That's so hard. I think that something that gets people really excited about Mars is all the images that we send back. We send back a lot of really awesome images, but if there was a way to send video back, or maybe some kind of 3D image or something, I think that would get people really excited, and make you feel like you're really there. It also would help us to navigate Mars better while we're driving, and maybe even do more science. I think that would be cool, like enhanced cameras. And at least, let's see. So advice for people coming along. Like I said, I never expected to be where I am today. So even if you're sitting there and you can't even imagine being able to work at a place and do something like what I'm able to do every day, don't let that deter you, because I also was the same way. I didn't know that I was going to end up here. It was a lot of things that I ended up doing on my way. Like I got involved in after school activities and extracurricular clubs and stuff like that. I really like to do like robotic competitions and science competitions and stuff. When I got into high school, I did summer programs. And so you guys might be able to find that when you're in high school that there's a lot of summer programs offered at maybe universities or something that try to teach you about engineering. And you can use that to figure out what field you might want to go to. Because I didn't know I wanted to go to mechanical engineering. I didn't even know what a mechanical engineer was when I was growing up. And so I went to summer programs to figure that out. And then once I got to college, I continued to do stuff over my summer. So I would try to get internships as much as possible. So really it's about planning out all your own future and then taking advantage of opportunities that are out there.
All right. Well, Aaron, what always seems to happen is the time just flies when we have events like this. I know there's going to be classrooms who definitely still have more questions. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to suggest that maybe they tweet some your way.
Oh yeah, sure. Of course.
All right. So it's at Yazzie Says, right? On Twitter?
That's right.
All right. Perfect.
As in, like says, like I talk, Yazzie says.
Yep. Perfect. So classrooms, if you want to tweet some more questions Aaron's way, feel free as well. Maybe some classrooms don't use Twitter. If you email me some questions, I can pass those along to Aaron as well. But Aaron, thank you so much for joining us today, for helping us start Secret Path Week here in Canada. So great to hear your story and about the awesome work you're doing at NASA. And I definitely think there's some students out there thinking about their future careers in space exploration.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me. It was so good to see all of you guys. And like I said, we need you. You're going to be the next astronauts that go to Mars. It's exciting.
All right. Well, classrooms, thank you so much for the awesome questions. Last thing I'm going to do is turn the microphones on. Everyone's coming on. Big goodbye and thank you for Aaron today. Here we go. As per usual, they're always so good at that part. Thanks, everybody. We have more Secret Path Week events coming up at 1 o'clock Eastern with Andrea Reed, and then one more at 2:30 Eastern with Angela Miracle Gladu. So we're looking forward to seeing more classrooms joining us then. Aaron, again, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to future connections.
All right. Thank you, guys.